And that's the reason why, emerging from the world's worst economic downturn since the 1930s, unemployment today in Britain is barely more than half what it was in the recessions of the 1980s and again of the 1990s. And I know that many here will remember, as I do, the effect those recessions had on our community in East London. And it's also the reason why, with confidence returning to economies around the world, we are redoubling efforts now for the long term, trying to make sure that today's poor children do not become tomorrow's poor adults. 3 weeks ago we finished the committee stage of the Child Poverty Bill in the House of Commons, and it will return for its report stage in the Commons next week. And that bill does put the commitment Tony Blair made 10 years ago on the statute book. It will require government to eradicate child poverty by 2020. Now, how does that work? Well, the way it works in the bill is to require government to track 4 measures of child poverty and to oblige the government to ensure that by 2020 all 4 of those measures are below a level, a target level, which is set out in the legislation. So, for example, probably the most commonly used measure for child poverty is the proportion of children in relative poverty, that is, living in households whose income is less than 60% of the median income for households of that size. And what the bill says is the proportion of children in that position will have to be less than 10% by 2020, which would be the lowest level which has been achieved in Europe over a reasonable length of time. Occasionally in countries it's been reduced to a level of less than 10%, but not on a sustained basis. 10% is the lowest level that's been achieved on a sustained basis. That's the obligation in the legislation to get to that level by 2020. And that compares to about 23-24% of children below the poverty line in Britain at the moment. The other 3 measures set out in the bill are absolute poverty, where the measuring line isn't uprated by income, relative poverty and material deprivation. That's based on household surveys of households that don't have access to a range of things which people are asked about. Can you afford to go on holiday? Those sorts of issues. That's going to be less than 5%, and persistent poverty will also be measured, tracking people's experience over time. And the bill requires the target for all 4 of those to be met, and once the bill has become law, for government to develop a strategy within 12 months for meeting those 4 commitments, and to draw on advice from a new Child Poverty Commission, which will be set up in terms of the legislation as well. To rise to all of those challenges, government action has got to be shaped by and inspired by this partnership of equals, which is the way to deliver what all of us want to see. Solving problems of the scale and complexity of child poverty will require the effort and expertise of a whole host of organisations. And the role of local service providers, those who meet face to face with struggling families every day in the way that Kevin was describing, that contribution is key to whether or not this is all going to be successful. Local providers know their residents better than anybody, certainly far better than anyone in Whitehall, and you know the pressures people face, you understand what support they need and how to tailor services to their needs. In London there are fantastic examples of local authorities on a mission to relieve poverty in their communities. Leaders really committed to services that can make the difference that is required. And they're working with other local organisations, voluntary sector organisations, local schools, short-staff sectors and others, all showing determination, creativity, willingness to listen closely to families in poverty to make sure the services they provide meet the needs of the people that rely on them. The Child Poverty Bill will place a duty on every local authority to produce its own strategy on how child poverty will be addressed in their area. And what we want is for every local authority to heed the examples of the best. And it's why in our national strategy for enabling child poverty, which we'll be publishing in the new year, we also have how local authorities and their partners can play their part. The state has a key role, but the state on its own is not the solution. Society, communities, local leaders, neighbours, faith groups, local organisations have all got a key part in this fight. We've built up a combined effort over the past decade. We would have liked to have made more progress over the past decade. Over the next decade, we need to ensure government and local communities work more closely together to achieve this shared goal of eradicating child poverty. Organisations that are here today play a very important part in helping parents in London. The impact on the lives of families is huge, and one thing I want to do this morning on behalf of government is to express thanks to everybody for the contribution that you are making. Sometimes we forget to say thank you, but it's very important that we should do so. Our vision is rooted in a sense of possibility of what we can all do if we work together over the next 10 years on this. Government on its own can't eradicate child poverty, but in a partnership of equals, government with you, building on what we've already done over the past 10 years, then I'm convinced we can, in the next decade, reach that goal next decade ago, and one that every single one of us believes in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There will be an opportunity to ask people questions at the end of all the 4 speakers.